one of the most beautiful warbirds to ever take to the sky. Her streamlined body and beautiful lines go hand in hand with her power and armament. A major factor helping Great Britain win the all-important Battle of Britain was standing the German Luftwaffe raids on mainland Britain during World War II. She was not only an iconic design, she had speed and maneuverability and became a lifesaver for Britain in 1940. The Supermarine Spitfire, a short-range, high-performance interceptor, was designed by R.J. Mitchell at Supermarine Aviation Works. Her name, Spitfire, came from Supermarine's chairman, Robert McLean, who named it after his daughter's nickname, for she was fiery and energetic. The distinctive elliptical wing of the Spitfire was designed by Beverly Shinstone, and it featured sunken rivets, achieving a thin cross-section which produced speed. The British made more Spitfires than any other aircraft, 20,341 in total. The Spitfire had many variants from the Mark I to the Mark 24. The Spitfire was first introduced at the RAF Hendon Air Display on June 27, 1936. The Spitfire saw delays in construction due to Supermarine being a relatively small company and already had two other planes they were building. Reluctant to source out work of the Spitfire to someone else, telling the Air Ministry they would have the order completed. The first production Spitfire was flown by Jeffrey Quill on May 15, 1938, 24 months after the initial order. 1936 also saw Herbert Alston take over the Shadow Factory plan, tasked with building 9 new factories and helping the car industry reorganize to produce aircraft. The Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory was built next to an aerodrome and was given all the latest machine tools, and by June 1940 she was starting to produce Spitfires. The factory experienced many startup problems, but she started spitting out Mark II Spitfires in rapid succession eventually. As far as design, the Spitfire airframe was a complex design. A streamlined semi-monocoque duralumin skinned fuselage had many compound curves over 19 skeleton frames. 14 longitudinal stringers and 4 main longerons attached to the frame formed a light, rigid structure which sheets of alclad skin was attached. The fuselage was plating of 24, 28, and 18 gauges. As far as the wing design, aerodynamicist Beverly Shinstone said, and I quote, "The elliptical wing was decided upon quite early on. Aerodynamically, it was the best for our purpose because the induced drag caused in producing lift has lowest when this shape was used. The ellipse was theoretically a perfection. To reduce drag, we wanted the best possible thickness to chord, consistent with necessary strength, but near the root, the wing had to be thick enough to accommodate the retracted undercarriages and guns. Mitchell was an intensely practical man. The ellipse was simply the shape that allowed us the thinnest possible wing with room inside to carry the necessary structure and the things we wanted to cram in. And it looked nice. The wing had a thickness to chord ratio of 13% at the root, reducing to 9.4% at the tip. A dihedral of 6 degrees was adapted to increase stability. With the adoption of an all-glycol cooling system and new radiator designs that used cooling air to generate thrust and keep the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine cool on early models, and that the Rolls-Royce Griffin engines in later models. Another key feature was its washout. The edge of the wings twisted slightly upward along its span, the angle of incident decreasing from +2 degrees at its root to -0.5 degree at its tip. The flight controls, originally cloth, was replaced with a light alloy which was more reliable in high-stress conditions. As the Spitfire gained more power and was able to maneuver at higher speeds, aileron reversal affecting pilots had increased in possibility. The Spitfire F Mark 21 and successors fixed this potential problem by strengthening the wing added a new aileron using piano strings, which theoretically increased reversal speed from earlier 400 miles per hour to 825 miles per hour. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine featured a carb instead of fuel injection. The carburetor was thought to be better than fuel injection due to the fuel fed to the supercharger cools said supercharging air by 25 degrees Celsius, this cooling enhancing performance, especially at high altitudes, increasing power and speed. But pilots had to learn to half roll before diving to pursue opponents so fuel wasn't forced out of the carburetor by negative G's. Earlier Spitfires had only 4 guns, with the other 4 fitted later due to early shortages of Brownings. The guns would freeze up in cold weather, so they had to be protected from the cold. A meeting was held, and scientific officer Captain F.W. Gunner Hill presented diagrams with calculations showing future fighters must have no fewer than 8 guns, each capable of firing 1,000 rounds per minute due to the size of bombers and other planes they would face. His assistant, who helped him make these calculations, was his teenage daughter. Combat reports stated that an average of 4,500 rounds was needed to down bombers and airplanes. Eventually, with a few cannon designs tried, Supermarine perfected a more reliable installation with 4 303s in each wing. These first fighters were delivered to the 19th Squadron. 19th Squadron received the first Spitfire Mark 1s K9789 at RAF Duxford on August 4th, 1938. Although they were more Hurricanes than Spitfires during the Battle of Britain in defense against the Luftwaffe, the attrition rates in the Spitfires were lower due to the Spitfires' higher performance, with Spitfires having a higher victory-to-loss ratio. Fighter Command adopted the strategy of using Spitfires to engage the German escort aircrafts, usually Bf-109s, and the Hurricanes would hit the German bombers. The Spitfire had many diverse roles after the Battle of Britain, contributing to the British's air power during World War II and beyond. A Spitfire became Great Britain's first high-speed photo reconnaissance plane operated by the RAF. They helped the RAF photograph the Freya and Warburg radar systems, as well as confirmed the Germans were building the Vergeltungswaffen V-1 and V-2 rockets on the Baltic Sea coast. The Spitfires also helped to keep Malta from being hit as hard as she could be, or could have been, by the Luftwaffe and the Regia Aeronautica in 1943. And she also helped pave the way for the Allied invasions of Sicily and Italy. In the Pacific, the Spitfire wasn't as good against the acrobatic Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The Zero could easily outturn the Spitfire and stay in the air 3 times as long. To counter the Zero, Spitfire pilots adopted a slash and run policy, using their speed and diving superiority to hit Zeros quick and avoiding dogfights. Allies achieved air superiority when the Mark 8 replaced the Mark 5s in the region. In 1943, high-speed diving trials were going on at Farnborough, investigating handling characteristics of aircraft traveling near the speed of sound. The Spitfire 11 was chosen for these tests, and squadron leader J.R. Tobin, flying EN 409, reached 606 miles per hour, or Mach .891, in a 45-degree dive. In April of 1944, Anthony F. Martindale reached Mach .92, but the propeller and reduction gear broke off, and being tail-heavy, she climbed back to altitude, with Martindale passing out from the 11G load, but realized when he woke up he was at 40,000 feet and the wings were actually slightly swept back. He successfully glided 20 miles back to the airfield, landing safely, which earned him an Air Force Cross. On February 5th, 1952, a Spitfire 19 of 81 Squadron out of Hong Kong reached the highest altitude ever reached in a Spitfire. Flight Lieutenant Edward Ted Poles climbed to 51,550 feet on a weather surveying mission. The cabin pressure bottomed out, causing a flat spin of his Spitfire, but he recovered and landed safely. The Spitfire had 24 marks and few subvariants in her history. 6,487 Mark V Spitfires were the most built, being followed by 5,656 Mark IXs. The Spitfire had different wing variants holding different weapons configurations, and we will talk about those later. Although speed and armament kept improving, the Spitfire always remained a short-legged fighter with relatively small fuel capacity and short range compared to other fighters. A naval version of the Spitfire was known as the Seafire, adapted for operations off of aircraft carriers. The Seafire II even was able to outperform A6M0s at low altitude during mock combat exercises. But Allied carrier-based aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat and the F-4U Corsair were more robust naval fighters and practical for naval operations. The original Spitfires had the soon-to-be famous Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 liquid-cooled engine that produced 1,470 horsepower with a max speed of 370 miles per hour. 41 Squadron received the first Spitfires with the Rolls-Royce Griffin engine in April of 1943. They had a speed of 400 miles per hour, but wasn't as easy to handle as the earlier versions that had less power. As American fighters took up the escort roles during World War II, the Spitfire Griffins assumed the tactical air superiority roles, playing a major role in intercepting V-1s and V-2s. The Merlin and Packard variants became used in fighter-bomber roles. The Spitfire's final version was the Mark 24 on April 13, 1946. February 20th, 1948 saw the last production Spitfire VN 496 leave the production line. 80 Squadron were the only ones to use Spitfire Mark 24s as part of the German occupational forces until they were moved to Hong Kong in July 1949. April 1st, 1954 saw the Spitfire fly its last operational sortie for the RAF with PS 888, a PR Mark 19 Spitfire of 81 Squadron. The ground crew had painted "The Last" on the aircraft's nose to commemorate the last Spitfire RAF flight. Many countries have incorporated the use of the Spitfire, and they are Australia, Belgium, Burma, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Egypt, France, Free France, Greece, Hong Kong, India, the Indian Empire, Ireland, Israel, Italy, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Southern Rhodesia, South Africa, the Soviet Union, Sweden, Syria, Thailand, Turkey, the United Kingdom, United States, and Yugoslavia. The general characteristics of the Spitfire are as follows, and this is a generalization of the variants. Length was 29 feet 11 inches. It had a height of 11 feet 5 inches, a wingspan of 36 feet 10 inches. Its empty weight was 5,065 pounds, with a gross weight of 6,622 pounds. Her max takeoff weight was 6,700 pounds. Her original power plant was a Rolls-Royce Merlin 45 V12 liquid-cooled supercharged engine producing 1,470 horsepower with a 3-blade Rotor constant-speed propeller giving a max speed of 370 miles per hour and a range of 470 miles, a combat range of 248 miles. Her service ceiling was 36,500 feet. She had a rate of climb of 2,600 feet per minute, and her power-to-mass ratio was 0.22 horsepower per pound. The Spitfire's armaments were as follows. The A-Wing had 8 .303 Browning Mark II machine guns with 350 rounds per gun. The B-Wing design had 2 20mm Hispano Mark II cannons with 60 rounds per gun, and 4 .303 Browning Mark II guns with 350 rounds per gun. The C-Wing variant had 4 20mm Hispano Mark II cannons with 120 rounds per gun, or it could have 2 20mm Hispanos and 4 .303 Browning machine guns with 350 rounds per gun. The E-Wing variant had 2 20mm Hispano Mark II cannons and 2 50 cal M2 Browning machine guns with 250 rounds per gun, and the Spitfire also carried 2 RP-3 rockets, one under each wing. A few famous Spitfire pilots were Johnny Johnson, who had 34 enemy kills, Douglas Bader, who had 20 kills, Bob Tuck, who had 27 kills, both Bader and Tuck becoming POWs during World War II, Paddy Finnegan, who had 28 to 32 kills before disappearing over the English Channel in 1942. Now, George Burling of Canada had 33 and a third kills. Sailor Milani from South Africa had 27 kills. The New Zealanders, Alan Deere with 17 kills, and C.F. Gray with 27 kills, and an Australian, Hugo Armstrong, with 12 kills. The Spitfire was an iconic, gorgeous aircraft that fit many roles for the RAF, becoming the backbone of the RAF's fighter squadrons well after World War II's end. There are still around 60 Spitfires flyable today. You can see them at air shows and venues around the world. I salute the brave pilots of the Spitfires of the past, and I thank you for joining me on this little journey, allowing me to introduce you to the Spitfire and its variant. And please subscribe, like, and even hit that noti bell. It does the channel good. It makes me feel like I have more friends and listeners. And I thank you for joining me. I'm Big Duke 6 from CoolKegs Productions. Servis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. Until next time, my friends.